Did you ever stop and think how many healthy foods from the 1970s were actually toxic? These foods filled pantries, lunchboxes, and dinner tables with promises of nutrition, weight loss, and modern convenience. So what hidden dangers were we swallowing without ever knowing it? Saccharin-sweetened diet foods were everywhere in the 1970s, sitting proudly on grocery shelves with labels that promised guilt-free sweetness and effortless weight control. Families bought them by the cartload, believing that science had finally cracked the code on enjoying dessert without paying the caloric price. Mothers stirred the little pink packets into coffee, baked with saccharin substitutes, and gave their children diet sodas thinking they were protecting them from sugar. The taste was slightly metallic, but people trained themselves to ignore it because the promise of 0 calories felt too good to question. What nobody talked about openly was the growing pile of laboratory studies showing something deeply troubling. Rats fed saccharin developed bladder tumors at alarming rates, and by 1977, the FDA nearly banned it entirely. Warning labels appeared on every product, but by then, millions had already consumed years' worth of the sweetener. The idea that something marketed as a healthy alternative could carry such serious risks shook public trust in ways that still echo today. Tab Cola was the glamorous diet drink of the 1970s, marketed directly to women who wanted to stay beautiful, thin, and modern without giving up their soda habit. The commercials practically glowed with images of slender models sipping from elegant glasses, promising that this bubbly pink can held the secret to effortless weight management. Women kept 6-packs in the refrigerator, brought cans to work, and drank them poolside during summer barbecues, genuinely believing they were making the smart, health-conscious choice. The flavor was sharp, almost aggressively sweet, but loyal fans insisted it tasted like freedom from calorie counting. What the advertisements never mentioned was that Tab relied heavily on saccharin, the same artificial sweetener raising red flags in laboratories across the country. People drank can after can without knowing that each sip delivered chemicals whose long-term effects were far from understood. When cancer warning labels started appearing, loyal Tab drinkers faced an uncomfortable truth. The beverage they trusted to keep them slim had been quietly carrying risks nobody wanted to discuss. Margarine was sold as the heart-healthy miracle spread that would save American families from the dangers of butter, and in the 1970s, nearly every kitchen had a tub of it sitting in the refrigerator door. Doctors recommended it, nutritionists endorsed it, and advertisements showed happy families spreading it on toast with the confidence that they were making a smart, modern choice. People genuinely believed that switching from butter to margarine would protect their hearts and keep them healthier for decades to come. The spread was cheap, it melted smoothly, and it came in bright yellow packaging that made it look wholesome and natural. What nobody understood was that margarine was loaded with trans fats, artificially created through hydrogenation that turned liquid oils into solid spreads. These trans fats did not protect hearts at all. Instead, they clogged arteries, raised bad cholesterol, and increased the risk of heart disease far more than the butter they were meant to replace. Decades later, researchers would call trans fats one of the most dangerous ingredients ever introduced into the American food supply. Liquid protein diets swept through the 1970s like wildfire, promising rapid weight loss for anyone desperate enough to replace real meals with a few ounces of flavored liquid. Doctors recommended them, celebrities endorsed them, and millions of Americans skipped breakfast, lunch, and dinner in favor of bottles that claimed to deliver all the nutrition a body could need. People lost weight fast, sometimes 20 or 30 pounds in weeks, and the medical establishment treated it as a breakthrough. Eaters mixed powders into shakes, sipped prepackaged formulas, and watched the numbers on the scale plummet with pride and hunger. What nobody realized until the bodies started piling up was that these liquid diets were nutritionally catastrophic. The protein came from low-quality sources like collagen, lacking essential amino acids the heart desperately needed. Eaters developed fatal heart arrhythmias, collapsing without warning as their bodies gave out. By the time the FDA investigated, nearly 60 deaths had been linked to these products. The weight loss miracle that promised a new body instead delivered tragedy to families who trusted science that was never properly tested. MSG-laden canned soups lined the shelves of every grocery store in the 1970s, marketed as wholesome, convenient meals that busy families could trust to nourish their loved ones. Mothers heated them on cold afternoons, packed them in thermoses for school lunches, and served them alongside sandwiches with complete confidence that they were providing something nutritious. The labels showed pictures of fresh vegetables and steaming bowls that promised comfort in every spoonful. Families had no idea that the savory flavor they loved came from monosodium glutamate, a chemical flavor enhancer quietly stirring controversy in medical circles. Reports surfaced of people experiencing headaches, flushing, numbness, and heart palpitations after eating foods high in MSG. Researchers called it Chinese restaurant syndrome at first, but symptoms appeared wherever MSG was heavily used, including those trusted cans sitting in American pantries. The industry insisted the additive was safe, but doubt had taken root. Parents who once felt proud of their quick meals began questioning what else might be hiding behind those reassuring labels. Red dye number 2 was the invisible ingredient that made foods in the 1970s look irresistibly appealing, coloring everything from fruit punches to gelatin desserts to candies marketed directly at children. Parents bought these brightly colored products without hesitation because they looked cheerful, fun, and perfectly safe for growing kids. Birthday cakes glowed with red frosting. Holiday punches sparkled in festive bowls, and lunchbox treats came wrapped in packaging that promised nothing but sweetness and joy. Nobody thought to question why food needed artificial coloring or what those dyes might be doing inside young bodies. Behind the scenes, however, scientists were raising serious alarms. Studies had linked red dye number 2 to cancer in laboratory animals, and American researchers scrambled to verify the troubling findings. The FDA faced mounting pressure as consumer advocates demanded answers about an additive used for decades without proper testing. In 1976, the dye was finally banned, but not before countless children had consumed it in products their parents believed were perfectly harmless. Cyclamate sweetened beverages were the original zero-calorie miracle drinks, promising all the sweetness of sugar with none of the guilt, and Americans embraced them with enthusiasm that bordered on devotion. Diet sodas, powdered drink mixes, and sugar-free desserts flooded the market, and health-conscious consumers believed they had finally found a way to enjoy sweetness without consequences. People drank these beverages daily, sometimes several cans at a time, trusting that 0 calories meant 0 harm. The taste was different from sugar, slightly chemical, but fans adapted quickly. What consumers did not know was that Cyclamate was already under investigation by federal health officials concerned about troubling laboratory findings. Studies showed that rats fed high doses developed bladder tumors, and the evidence was strong enough that the FDA took dramatic action. In 1969, Cyclamate was banned entirely, yanked from shelves with urgency that shocked loyal consumers. People who had been drinking these products for years suddenly wondered what damage might already be done. The ban became one of the first major food safety scandals to shake American confidence. Hydrogenated vegetable shortening was marketed as the clean, modern, heart-healthy alternative to animal fats, and American kitchens in the 1970s embraced it wholeheartedly. Cans of fluffy white shortening sat beside every stove, used for frying, baking, and greasing pans, with the confidence that choosing vegetable-based fats was responsible. Cookbooks recommended it, doctors approved of it, and food manufacturers used it in everything from cookies to crackers to frozen dinners. The idea that vegetable oil could be transformed into a solid, shelf-stable product seemed like pure progress. What nobody understood was that hydrogenation created trans fats, artificial molecules the human body had never evolved to process. These fats did not pass through the system harmlessly. They lodged in artery walls, raised bad cholesterol to dangerous levels, and dramatically increased the risk of heart attacks. Decades of research would prove that trans fats were among the most dangerous substances ever added to the food supply. The shortening families trusted to make their biscuits flaky and fried chicken crispy was quietly contributing to an epidemic. Enriched white bread was the nutritional cornerstone of the American diet in the 1970s. sitting in nearly every bread box and toasted in nearly every kitchen across the country. Families believed they were getting wholesome nourishment with every sandwich, every piece of toast, and every slice served alongside dinner. The packaging boasted about added vitamins and minerals, making it seem like this soft, fluffy bread was actually good for growing bodies. Children ate peanut butter and jelly on it, mothers made French toast with it, and nobody questioned whether something so familiar could possibly be anything less than healthy. The truth was far more complicated than those cheerful labels suggested. White bread started as whole wheat, but milling stripped away the fiber-rich bran and nutrient-dense germ, leaving behind starchy flour with almost no nutritional value. Manufacturers then sprayed synthetic vitamins back onto the depleted flour and called it enriched, as if adding back a fraction of what was removed made it healthy. The result spiked blood sugar, provided minimal fiber, and filled bellies with empty calories disguised as nutrition. Carnation Instant Breakfast was marketed as the perfect solution for busy mornings, a powdered drink mix that promised complete nutrition in a single glass of milk. Advertisements showed energetic families rushing out the door with smiles, confident that their quick breakfast was just as good as eggs, toast, and orange juice. Parents loved the convenience, kids loved the chocolate and vanilla flavors, and the product flew off shelves as modern life demanded faster solutions to traditional meals. The packaging emphasized protein, vitamins, and minerals, making it seem like a scientifically formulated health drink. What the cheerful marketing failed to mention was that Carnation Instant Breakfast was loaded with sugar, artificial flavors, and processed ingredients that had more in common with dessert than with actual breakfast. A single serving contained nearly as much sugar as a candy bar, dissolved into milk that families believed was nourishing their children. The vitamins were synthetic additions, not natural nutrients found in real food. Parents thought they were giving kids a healthy head start, but were actually beginning each day with a sugar rush disguised as modern nutrition. Slim Fast meal replacement shakes arrived in the late 1970s, promising a revolutionary approach to weight loss, a creamy shortcut that would help dieters shed pounds without counting calories or preparing complicated meals. The marketing was brilliant, featuring before and after photos that made dramatic transformation seem effortless. Women especially embraced these shakes, replacing breakfast and lunch with sweetened powder mixed into milk, believing they were taking control of their weight in a modern, scientific way. The packaging emphasized nutrition, listing vitamins and minerals that suggested this liquid meal was actually good for the body. What the cheerful advertisements glossed over was that these early formulas were nutritionally incomplete, loaded with sugar, and designed more for short-term results than long-term health. Dieters lost weight initially, then gained it back when they returned to real food. The shakes created a cycle of dependence and disappointment that kept customers buying more. The promise of a healthy solution turned out to be a processed product that taught an entire generation to fear real meals. High fructose corn syrup slipped into the American food supply during the 1970s, marketed as a natural sweetener derived from wholesome corn that could replace expensive cane sugar in everything from sodas to bread to baby food. Food manufacturers embraced it because it was cheap, easy to blend, and extended shelf life in ways that seemed miraculous. Families had no idea that this innocent-sounding ingredient appearing on more and more labels was anything other than a sensible alternative. The corn industry promoted it as a healthy choice, downplaying concerns with reassuring language about natural origins. What nobody anticipated was the metabolic chaos this sweetener would eventually unleash. Unlike regular sugar, high fructose corn syrup is processed differently by the liver, contributing to fat accumulation, insulin resistance, and appetite disruption in ways researchers are still uncovering. Scientists would link the rise of obesity, diabetes, and fatty liver disease directly to this sweetener in processed foods. The natural ingredient that promised to make food better and cheaper instead helped fuel one of the worst public health crises in American history. Powdered non-dairy coffee creamers were marketed as the lighter, more convenient alternative to real cream, and in the 1970s, they became a staple in break rooms, diners, and kitchen cabinets across the country. People loved the idea of a shelf-stable product that did not need refrigeration, lasted for months, and dissolved instantly into hot coffee with a satisfying swirl. The labels suggested something cleaner and more modern than heavy cream, appealing to health-conscious consumers who worried about dairy fat. Families kept jars of the powder beside the coffee maker, spooning it into cups morning after morning, without questioning what made it so unnaturally smooth. What those cheerful containers never revealed was that the creamy texture came from partially hydrogenated oils, the same trans fats that were quietly destroying hearts across America. Every cup of coffee lightened with this powder delivered a small dose of artificial fat that the body could not properly process. The convenience that seemed so modern was actually introducing toxins into the daily routines of millions who believed they were making a healthier choice. Processed cheese slices wrapped in individual plastic squares were marketed as the convenient, calcium-rich solution for busy families who wanted nutrition without the hassle of slicing real cheese. In the 1970s, these bright orange singles appeared in nearly every refrigerator, layered onto sandwiches, melted over burgers, and handed to children as wholesome snacks. The packaging emphasized calcium and protein, making parents feel confident they were building strong bones with every wrapped slice. Kids loved the mild, salty flavor and the satisfying way each slice peeled from its plastic wrapper. What families did not realize was that these products barely qualified as cheese at all. Manufacturers used emulsifiers, sodium, artificial colors, and processed milk byproducts to create something that melted uniformly and lasted far longer than any natural dairy product should. The calcium claims were technically true but misleading, since sodium content often negated any bone-building benefits. Generations grew up believing these plastic-wrapped squares were real food, never knowing they were eating a laboratory creation designed more for shelf stability than nutrition. Vienna sausages packed in tiny pull-top cans were sold as convenient protein snacks perfect for lunchboxes, camping trips, and quick meals when time was short. In the 1970s, families kept stacks of these cans in pantries, trusting that the small, pale sausages inside were a sensible way to add meat to any meal. The labels emphasized protein content, making busy parents feel good about feeding their children something substantial and nourishing. Kids peeled back the lids and ate the sausages straight from the can, never questioning the soft texture or the salty taste that clung to every bite. What nobody talked about was what actually went into those tiny tubes of processed meat. Vienna sausages contained sodium nitrite, a preservative that keeps meat pink and prevents bacterial growth but has since been linked to increased cancer risk. The meat itself came from scraps and byproducts that would never sell on their own, ground and pressed into uniform shapes that hid their origins. The protein snack families trusted was a processed product loaded with preservatives, sodium, and mystery ingredients that modern nutrition would never recommend. Canned fruit cocktail in light syrup was presented as a healthy dessert alternative, a colorful mix of peaches, pears, grapes, and cherries that seemed like a sensible way to end a meal without the guilt of cake or pie. In the 1970s, these cans lined grocery shelves with labels that emphasized fruit servings and lighter sweetness, appealing to parents who wanted something nutritious. Mothers spooned the glistening chunks into bowls, topped them with cottage cheese, and felt proud that they were serving fruit instead of processed sweets. Children loved the bright colors and sweetness that made every bite feel like a treat. What those reassuring labels never made clear was that even light syrup contained shocking amounts of sugar, turning what should have been healthy into something closer to candy. The fruit itself had been cooked until most vitamins were destroyed, and the bright red cherries owed their color to artificial dyes rather than nature. Families who thought they were making smart nutritional choices were actually serving sugar-soaked, artificially colored fruit that delivered far less nutrition than a simple fresh apple. Granola burst onto the health food scene in the 1970s as the crunchy, natural alternative to sugary breakfast cereals, embraced by families who wanted to start their mornings with something wholesome and pure. The packaging featured images of golden oats, honey drizzles, and sun-kissed grains that promised energy, fiber, and all natural goodness in every bowl. Health-conscious parents switched from colorful kids' cereals to granola, believing they were finally feeding their families something that aligned with the back-to-nature movement sweeping the country. People sprinkled it over yogurt, ate it by the handful as a snack, and packed it into lunchboxes as proof of their commitment to healthy living. What nobody realized was that granola was one of the most calorie-dense foods in the entire grocery store. The crunchy clusters that seemed so virtuous were held together with sugar, honey, and oils that turned a single serving into a fat and calorie bomb. Many brands contained more sugar per ounce than the frosted cereals they were meant to replace. The health food that symbolized natural eating was actually sabotaging diets and blood sugar levels across America. Jell-O was promoted as the perfect light dessert for calorie-conscious families, a jiggly, colorful treat that seemed almost too fun to be anything but harmless. In the 1970s, mothers served it at dinner parties, packed it into lunchboxes, and offered it to children as a virtually guilt-free sweet that would not ruin appetites. The advertisements emphasized how few calories each serving contained, making it seem like the ideal choice for anyone watching their weight. Kids loved the bright colors, the wobbly texture, and the way it slid down easily after any meal. What those cheerful commercials never mentioned was that the brilliant reds, oranges, and greens came from artificial dyes, including red dye number 2 before its ban and other synthetic colorants that raised health concerns. The gelatin itself offered almost no nutritional value, and the sweetness came from either sugar or artificial sweeteners with their own controversial histories. Families who thought they were choosing something light and innocent were actually serving a processed product whose main ingredients were chemicals designed to create color and sweetness without any real food value. Sodium nitrite. Preserved breakfast meats were a staple of the American morning table in the 1970s, with bacon sizzling in pans, ham slices warming on griddles, and hot dogs appearing at weekend brunches alongside eggs. Families trusted these products completely, believing that starting the day with protein was the foundation of good health. The meats looked appealing, with that familiar pink color that suggested freshness and quality. Nobody questioned why bacon stayed so perfectly rosy, or why ham never turned the grayish-brown that cooked meat naturally becomes. The answer was sodium nitrite, a preservative that prevented bacterial growth and maintained that appetizing color. What researchers would later discover was deeply troubling. When sodium nitrite combines with proteins during high-heat cooking, it can form nitrosamines, compounds strongly linked to increased cancer risk. Studies began connecting regular consumption of processed meats to higher rates of colorectal cancer and other serious diseases. The breakfast tradition that families believed was nourishing their loved ones was actually delivering a daily dose of chemicals that modern medicine now urges people to strictly limit. BPA-lined canned vegetables were considered a convenient way to serve healthy produce year-round, stacked in pantry shelves as proof that families cared about getting their daily servings of green beans, corn, peas, and tomatoes. In the 1970s, canned vegetables seemed like a perfectly sensible choice, especially during winter months when fresh options were expensive or unavailable. Mothers heated them as side dishes, added them to casseroles, and felt confident they were providing nutrition even when the garden was buried under snow. The cans looked clean, the labels showed fresh vegetables, and nobody thought to question what might be lurking in the lining. That lining contained bisphenol A, a chemical that leached into food with every passing day on the shelf, especially in acidic products like tomatoes. Researchers eventually discovered that BPA disrupts hormones, mimicking estrogen in ways that affect development, reproduction, and metabolism. The healthy vegetables families trusted were silently delivering doses of an endocrine disruptor, with every serving turning a seemingly wholesome choice into an invisible source of chemical exposure. DDT residue on fresh produce was an invisible legacy that lingered long after the pesticide was banned, clinging to fruits and vegetables that families in the 1970s believed were perfectly wholesome. Farmers had sprayed DDT liberally for decades, trusting that this miracle chemical would protect crops from insects without harming the people who eventually ate the harvest. The pesticide seeped into soil, coated leaves, and accumulated in the flesh of apples, lettuce, tomatoes, and countless other staples of the American diet. Families washed their produce quickly under running water, never imagining that the residue could survive such simple cleaning. What nobody understood at the time was that DDT did not simply wash away or break down harmlessly. It accumulated in human tissue, building up over years of exposure until concentrations reached levels that disrupted hormones and damaged organs. Even after the ban took effect, residues continued appearing in food supplies grown in contaminated soil. The fresh fruits and vegetables that symbolized healthy eating had been quietly delivering doses of a banned toxin that would take generations to fully clear from the food chain. Alar treated red apples were the picture of wholesome American nutrition in the 1970s. Shiny and perfectly shaped fruits that parents packed into lunchboxes and served sliced alongside after-school snacks. The chemical diminizide sold under the brand name Alar was sprayed on apple orchards to regulate growth, improve color, and extend shelf life so that apples stayed crisp and appealing longer. Farmers loved the results, grocers loved the appearance, and families loved the convenience of fruit that did not bruise or soften too quickly. Nobody questioned what made these apples so unnaturally perfect. What consumers did not know was that Alar broke down into a compound called UDMH when apples were processed into juice, sauce, or baked goods, and UDMH was a suspected carcinogen. When studies revealed the risk, especially to children who consumed apple products in large quantities, public panic erupted almost overnight. The apple that had symbolized health and wholesomeness suddenly became a source of fear. Alar was pulled from the market, but not before millions of families had unknowingly fed their children fruit laced with chemicals nobody had properly tested. Lead-soldered canned baby formula was one of the most disturbing food safety failures of the 1970s, a product designed to nourish the most vulnerable members of society that instead delivered toxic heavy metal with every feeding. Parents trusted these cans completely, mixing formula for infants who depended entirely on adults to provide safe nutrition. The cans looked clean and modern, the labels showed healthy, smiling babies, and doctors recommended formula as a perfectly acceptable alternative to breastfeeding. Nobody imagined that the seams holding each can together were soldered with lead, a metal that leached slowly into the liquid inside. Lead exposure in infants causes devastating developmental damage, affecting brain development, learning ability, and behavior in ways that often do not become apparent until years later. By the time regulators understood the scope of the problem, countless babies had consumed formula contaminated by the very packaging meant to keep it safe. The cans that promised complete infant nutrition were quietly poisoning the children they were designed to protect, a betrayal of trust that still haunts public health discussions today. Brominated vegetable oil was added to citrus-flavored drinks throughout the 1970s, marketed as refreshing, vitamin-enriched beverages that parents felt good about serving to their families. The oil helped keep fruit flavoring evenly distributed throughout the drink, preventing that unappealing separation that made some beverages look artificial. Brands promoted their products as healthy alternatives to soda, emphasizing added vitamins and natural citrus flavors that seemed wholesome and nutritious. Kids drank these beverages after school, at sports practices, and with meals, believing they were making a better choice than reaching for a cola. What nobody mentioned was that brominated vegetable oil contained bromine, a chemical that accumulates in body tissue and interferes with thyroid function over time. Researchers eventually linked regular consumption to hormone disruption, neurological effects, and other serious health concerns. The FDA finally moved to ban the additive after decades of use, but not before generations of children had consumed countless glasses of drinks their parents believed were perfectly safe and even beneficial. Asbestos filtered wine and beer represented one of the strangest and most unsettling food safety oversights of the era, a practice that put known carcinogenic fibers directly into beverages that adults consumed regularly. In the 1970s, some wineries and breweries used asbestos filters to clarify their products, believing that the process improved taste and appearance without any meaningful risk. The filters removed particles that caused cloudiness, producing drinks that looked polished and professional. Nobody imagined that microscopic asbestos fibers might pass through the filtering process and end up in the final product. When scientists began connecting asbestos exposure to devastating cancers and lung diseases, the practice came under immediate scrutiny. Regulators moved to ban asbestos filtering, but the damage was already done. People who had enjoyed wine with dinner or beer at barbecues had no idea they were potentially ingesting fibers linked to mesothelioma and other fatal conditions. The filtered drinks that seemed so refined were actually delivering invisible hazards with every sip, a chilling reminder that even traditions as old as winemaking can hide modern dangers. Sodium benzoate soft drinks in metal cans were the silent experiment no one asked for. The preservative sodium benzoate was widely used to keep sodas fresh and prevent spoilage. It seemed harmless. But when manufacturers began packaging those sodas in aluminum cans, they created an accidental chemistry experiment. The acid in the soda reacted with both the metal and the preservative, forming trace amounts of benzene, a known carcinogen. The reaction was slow and invisible, but over time it turned sealed cans into ticking health hazards. Consumers had no idea. The drinks tasted the same, fizzy and bright, a staple at picnics and drive-ins. When scientists finally uncovered the problem in the 1980s, it was a public relations nightmare. Companies rushed to change formulas, remove sodium benzoate, and test for safety. But the damage to trust had already been done. It was another case of innovation outpacing caution, of chemistry being used before it was fully understood. The soda cans of the 1950s represented the excitement of a new age, but also its recklessness. They glimmered with promise, even as they carried a danger that no one could see. And just like that, something as innocent as a soft drink became another entry in the long list of modern mistakes. Finally, there were the tamarindo lollipops from Mexico, sweet, sour, and dusted with chili powder. Kids loved them for their bold flavor, something that made American candies seem plain by comparison. They were a favorite at corner stores and fiestas alike, a little piece of imported joy. But beneath that spicy coating lurked something deadly. When the news broke about the lead contamination, it spread through communities like heartbreak. Parents who had grown up eating them now had to take them away from their own children, turning joy into fear. Investigations revealed that some batches were contaminated with lead, not just in the candy itself, but in the packaging and ink used on wrappers. The ban came swiftly, and shipments stopped overnight. Families who had grown up with those treats felt an unexpected sense of loss. What was once a taste of culture and childhood became a cautionary tale about oversight and safety. Yet for many, that flavor, the heat, the tang, the sweetness, still carries memories of home. It is strange how something that once united so many people could be forbidden so suddenly. But maybe that is what nostalgia is all about, remembering what we loved even when we were not supposed to. Mechanically separated poultry filled the chicken nuggets and patties served at fast food restaurants during the 1970s, processed through machines that stripped every usable bit of meat from bones under high pressure. The result was a pink slurry that could be shaped, breaded, and fried into forms that children eagerly devoured without asking what was inside. Parents trusted the familiar shapes and golden coating, never imagining the industrial process that created them. The nuggets were cheap, consistent, and perfectly designed for small hands and picky eaters. But mechanically separated meat included tissues and cartilage that would never appear in traditional cuts, and the process raised questions about what exactly counted as chicken. When consumers learned how their favorite nuggets were made, the backlash was swift. Regulators stepped in with labeling requirements, forcing manufacturers to reformulate or face consumer rejection. Today, many chains advertise whole muscle meat in their chicken products, a direct response to the disgust that followed revelations about the pink paste that once defined fast food chicken. Full sugar chocolate pudding cups were the crown jewels of the cafeteria dessert section, small plastic containers filled with smooth sweetness that made even the worst lunch days feel survivable. Kids peeled back the foil lids with anticipation, sometimes licking them clean before diving into the pudding with plastic spoons that bent under the pressure of eager scooping. The chocolate flavor was intense and unapologetically sweet, The kind of dessert that coated your tongue and lingered long after the last bite. Schools offered them freely, sometimes encouraging seconds for students who finished their main courses. Parents saw pudding as a harmless treat, something that made children happy without causing obvious harm. But those little cups contained far more sugar than anyone realized, packed into servings that exceeded what modern nutritionists consider safe for a single meal. When federal guidelines began restricting added sugars in school meals, chocolate pudding cups became one of the first casualties. The versions available today are reformulated with artificial sweeteners or reduced sugar content that changes the taste entirely. For anyone who remembers the original, the difference is clear. Those shiny silver balls that once sparkled on Christmas cookies were more than decoration. They were tradition. Every family had them, tucked away in a jar beside colored sprinkles. They were called silver dragees, tiny metallic orbs that made cakes and wedding desserts shimmer like jewelry. In the glow of candlelight or under frosting, they looked almost too beautiful to eat. And, as it turned out, they were. The Food and Drug Administration banned them after discovering the metallic coating contained real silver, which is not considered edible. For years, bakers had sprinkled actual metal onto desserts without realizing the potential health risk. It was not toxic in small amounts, but the government could not take chances. By the early 2000s, the silver balls disappeared from American stores, relegated to "for decoration only" status. Still, people continued using them secretly, claiming no holiday cookie looked complete without that touch of sparkle. They became a quiet act of nostalgia, a bit of rebellion wrapped in frosting. Even now, older recipe books list them casually, as though nothing ever changed. There was magic in those metallic sweets, a reminder that sometimes beauty and danger can share the same shine, and that not everything meant for the eye should ever meet the tongue. Olestra fat-free snack foods were supposed to change the world, or at least the waistlines of America. When they hit the shelves in the 1990s, people could not believe it. Potato chips with all the flavor and none of the fat. Ads promised guilt-free indulgence, a revolution in snacking. The secret was Olestra, a synthetic fat molecule that passed through the body undigested. The science seemed sound, the dream flawless, until people started eating it. Within months, complaints poured in. The chips tasted fine, but they came with a terrible side effect: sudden, uncontrollable digestive distress. The phrase "anal leakage" became an unintentional part of pop culture. Consumers were horrified, and late-night comedians had a field day. Regulators eventually forced warning labels on Olestra products, and the once promising miracle faded into embarrassment. For a while, the brand tried to rebrand and reformulate, but the damage was done. People no longer trusted any food that claimed to cheat nature. The shelves emptied, and the name Olestra joined the long list of scientific missteps dressed up as progress. It was the perfect lesson of the modern food age. You can outsmart fat, but not the body. Sodium nitrite at unregulated levels preserved the bacon, ham, and deli meats served at fast food restaurants during the 1970s, keeping everything pink, fresh-looking, and shelf-stable far longer than nature intended. The preservative prevented bacterial growth and gave cured meats that appetizing color customers expected, but nobody monitored how much was being used. Restaurants piled bacon onto burgers, stuffed sandwiches with processed ham, and served breakfast platters loaded with cured meats that contained concentrations now considered dangerous. Families ate without hesitation, trusting that the food industry knew what it was doing. But sodium nitrite forms compounds called nitrosamines when heated or digested, and those compounds have been linked to increased cancer risk. Once researchers documented the connection, regulators stepped in with strict limits on how much nitrite could be added to any food product. The freewheeling days of unmeasured preservatives ended, replaced by careful formulations and mandatory labeling. Today, the bacon on your breakfast sandwich contains a fraction of what it once did, though the memory of those heavily preserved meats lingers. Pink slime meat fillers in ground beef were one of the cafeteria secrets that nobody talked about because nobody even knew they existed. The hamburgers and taco meat that children ate throughout the 1980s contained something called lean, finely textured beef, a product made from scraps and trimmings, spun in centrifuges and treated with ammonia to kill bacteria. It stretched the meat supply, lowered costs, and allowed schools to serve more students with smaller budgets. Kids bit into burgers believing they were eating real ground beef, never imagining that a portion came from processed leftovers that barely resembled meat. The texture blended in perfectly, masked by ketchup, mustard, and whatever else children piled on top. For years, this filler moved through school kitchens without question. But when journalists and food safety advocates exposed the practice, the public reaction was fierce. Parents demanded transparency, regulators tightened requirements, and pink slime was eventually banned from school cafeterias nationwide. Today, ground beef served to students must meet stricter standards that leave no room for the mystery fillers that once stretched every serving. Coca-Cola with real coca extract was one of those open secrets everyone knew but no one mentioned. The original formula, created decades earlier, contained trace amounts of coca leaf, the same plant used to make cocaine. By the 1950s, the company claimed to have removed it, but in some rural bottling plants, the old recipe still found its way into production. It gave the soda a unique kick, a kind of energy that people swore by. No one called it addiction back then. They just said it helped them get through the day. Coca-Cola was more than a drink. It was America's tonic, its pick-me-up, its symbol of modern energy. But once the truth became impossible to ignore, Coca-Cola quietly changed its process for good. What was left was still iconic, but a little less wild, a little more safe. It's funny to think that one of the most innocent brands in American history was once powered by something so forbidden. Candy cigarettes looked harmless, but they carried a powerful message that shaped an entire generation's habits. Kids mimicked adults, holding the chalky white sticks between their fingers, pretending to take slow drags before puffing out imaginary smoke. They were part of every corner store display, next to bubble gum and jawbreakers, colorful boxes that proudly mirrored real cigarette brands. Back then, it was just make-believe fun, a little way to act grown up. But as health awareness grew and smoking rates dropped, society realized that these candies were more than innocent play. They were marketing addiction wrapped in sugar. The government banned them for encouraging underage smoking and normalizing tobacco culture. Yet for many who grew up in the 70s or 80s, the memory lingers. You can still recall the chalky taste, the white powder coating your lips, the cool swagger of pretending to be older than you were. It was a candy that told kids to dream dangerously, and even though it is gone, its image still smolders like a cigarette that refuses to die out completely. Styrofoam clamshell containers were the unmistakable packaging of fast food in the 1970s, snapping shut with a satisfying click that told you dinner was ready to go. Every burger, every fish sandwich, and every pile of hot nuggets came nestled inside that white foam shell, keeping food warm while families drove home or ate in parking lots with the windows rolled down. Kids loved pressing their thumbs into the material and watching the dents stay put, not realizing they were handling something that would never break down. The containers were cheap to produce, incredibly effective at insulation, and everywhere you looked. But Styrofoam leached chemicals into hot food, especially when grease and heat combined inside that sealed environment. Studies later revealed that styrene, a compound in the foam, carried real health risks with prolonged exposure. Environmental concerns mounted as landfills overflowed with containers that refused to decompose. Cities began banning them one by one, and today most major chains have abandoned Styrofoam entirely. That familiar snap of a clamshell closing is now a sound from a different era, one where convenience outweighed consequences. Those cafeteria meals shaped our childhoods, filling trays with foods we trusted completely. So what changed so drastically that the lunches we loved are now forbidden? Whole milk served in every carton was the unquestioned standard in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s, sitting in metal coolers beside the lunch line like tiny white soldiers waiting to be chosen. Kids grabbed them without thinking, peeling back the paper spout and drinking deeply while chatting with friends. Parents believed milk was simply good for growing bodies, and nobody questioned whether the fat content mattered. The creamy richness felt like part of the meal itself, something that washed down the heaviest cafeteria foods and left a satisfying film on the lips. Teachers encouraged it, nurses praised it, and lunch ladies handed out extras to anyone who asked. But when federal nutrition guidelines changed, whole milk became a target almost overnight. Studies linked full-fat dairy in childhood to weight concerns that worried health officials nationwide. Regulators stepped in and declared that only skim or 1% milk could be offered to students in public schools. The cartons stayed the same, but the contents grew thinner and far less satisfying to those who remembered how milk used to taste. Butter-flavored margarine was a 1950s wonder, spreadable, cheap, and promoted as a heart-healthy alternative to butter. Housewives embraced it as the modern choice, the sign of progress in every kitchen. Its golden color and smooth texture promised indulgence without guilt. It was advertised in bright magazines beside smiling families and spotless kitchens, the perfect picture of American prosperity. Scientists and companies alike told the public it was the smarter fat, a scientific marvel that separated them from the old-fashioned ways of their parents. But science back then cared more about selling innovation than testing its safety. The secret behind its miracle formula was trans fats, the industrial oils hydrogenated to stay solid at room temperature. For decades, Americans slathered their toast and fried their eggs in it, believing they were doing their hearts a favor. Then the studies came, and the truth was hard to swallow. Trans fats were worse than the butter they replaced, clogging arteries and shortening lives. By the time it was banned, it had already shaped the diet of a generation. Butter-flavored margarine was more than a product. It was a lie sold with a smile. Back in the 1970s, a strange panic swept the candy aisle, the disappearance of red M&Ms. The culprit was red dye number 2, a synthetic coloring agent suspected of being carcinogenic. Mars pulled the red candies entirely, even though the specific dye was never used in M&Ms to begin with. Still, perception was stronger than fact. The empty red spaces in the bag made the other colors feel lonelier, like a rainbow missing its heart. Parents whispered warnings while kids traded rumors about the candy that could supposedly kill you. For almost a decade, the world's favorite chocolate candy had no red pieces. Kids traded theories on playgrounds and stared at colorless handfuls, wondering what was so dangerous about red. When red M&Ms finally returned with a new formula, it felt like a national celebration. People did not just get a color back, they got a piece of the past restored. It is funny how something so small could symbolize trust, fear, and nostalgia all at once. Today, that red candy means something different. It is a tiny reminder of how our food and our fears often share the same shade. Unrefrigerated condiment bars lined the walls of fast food restaurants during the 1970s, offering open containers of ketchup, mustard, relish, and mayonnaise-based sauces that sat at room temperature for hours. Customers grabbed plastic spoons and scooped whatever they wanted onto their trays, dipping fries and spreading sauces without considering how long those containers had been sitting out. The setup seemed generous and convenient, a self-serve approach that let families customize their meals without waiting in line. Nobody wore gloves, nobody monitored temperatures, and nobody worried about the occasional fly that landed on the edge of an open tub. But mayonnaise and other creamy sauces spoil quickly without refrigeration, creating ideal conditions for bacterial growth that could send unsuspecting customers home with food poisoning. Health inspectors eventually cracked down, requiring refrigeration, covered dispensers, and single-serve packets that eliminated the contamination risks. The open condiment bar vanished from fast food restaurants, replaced by squeeze bottles and foil-wrapped portions that felt less generous but were infinitely safer. Unlimited salt shakers on cafeteria tables were as common as napkin dispensers, sitting within arm's reach of every student who wanted to season their food without restriction. Kids grabbed them instinctively, shaking white crystals across mashed potatoes, green beans, and anything else that seemed too bland. No one monitored how much sodium poured out, and no one worried about health consequences hiding in each generous shake. It felt like freedom, like being trusted to make your own choices about how food should taste. Some children turned it into a game, competing to see who could pile the most salt onto a single tray. Lunch aides rarely intervened because seasoning food seemed harmless compared to other mischief students could cause. But those tiny shakers added up. When health researchers began connecting childhood sodium intake to long-term blood pressure problems, school nutrition guidelines changed dramatically. Salt shakers were pulled from tables, and kitchens were required to prepare foods within strict sodium limits. Today, giving students unlimited access to salt seems almost reckless, a relic of an era that trusted children with choices we now understand were never truly safe. Raw milk was once the pride of the American farm, bottled straight from the source and sold in glass jars. People swore it tasted better, richer, creamier, and somehow more real. In the 1950s, it was still common to see it on grocery shelves, untouched by modern processing. But beneath the nostalgia was danger. Without pasteurization, raw milk carried bacteria that caused tuberculosis, salmonella, and other deadly diseases. Rural families, especially in dairy states, considered pasteurization unnecessary city talk. They trusted their cows, their neighbors, and the land itself. Unfortunately, nature is not as kind as nostalgia remembers. It hides danger even in the things we love most. Families believed they were drinking nature's perfect food, not knowing that it sometimes carried the very thing that made them sick. Eventually, stricter food laws swept across the country, forcing dairies to heat-treat every drop before it hit the store. Raw milk became illegal in most states, a symbol of both freedom lost and safety gained. To some, it was government overreach. To others, it was salvation. Either way, the days of milk straight from the cow were gone for good. Then there were Olestra chips, the so-called miracle snack of the 90s. They promised all the flavor of regular potato chips with none of the fat. For families trying to eat healthier, that was a dream come true. Bags of these chips filled grocery aisles with big labels that said fat-free and guilt-free. But the dream turned sour fast. People discovered that Olestra did not just remove fat, it also removed dignity. It blocked the body from absorbing essential vitamins and caused severe digestive distress. The stories spread fast, and suddenly the chips became the punchline of every late-night talk show. What started as a scientific breakthrough ended as a national embarrassment. Within a few years, Olestra was quietly pulled from shelves, never to return. It left behind a strange lesson about how far we are willing to go to keep the foods we love while pretending to make them better for us. Some things, it seems, were meant to stay full of fat and full of flavor. Chlorofluorocarbon-propelled whipped cream canisters sat behind fast food counters throughout the 1970s, shooting fluffy white peaks onto sundaes and pies with a satisfying hiss. The propellant inside those metal cans worked perfectly, creating light and airy topping that held its shape beautifully. Workers pressed the nozzle dozens of times per shift, releasing tiny bursts of gas that drifted into kitchen air and eventually into the atmosphere. Nobody worried about what happened after the cream landed on the dessert. The cans were convenient, reliable, and everywhere. But chlorofluorocarbons were silently destroying the ozone layer, creating a global environmental crisis that scientists were only beginning to understand. When the connection became clear, regulators moved aggressively to ban CFCs from consumer products, including the whipped cream dispensers that had become standard equipment in every fast food dessert station. Restaurants switched to alternative propellants, and the familiar hiss changed slightly in ways most customers never noticed. Today, those old CFC canisters represent a strange intersection of innocent dessert toppings and planetary damage. Deep-fried fish sticks made with trans fats were a cafeteria treasure that arrived every Friday like clockwork, golden and crispy and practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. Kids lined up eagerly because Fish Stick Day meant something special, a break from the usual rotation that felt almost celebratory. The breading crackled with each bite, giving way to flaky white fish that tasted vaguely of the ocean and heavily of the deep fryer. What nobody realized was that those fryers bubbled with partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, a cooking fat that made everything crispier and quietly dangerous. Lunch ladies loaded baskets and lowered them into shimmering pools of oil reused all week, each batch absorbing more trans fats that scientists would later connect to heart disease. Parents assumed fried fish was still healthy, still a reasonable choice for growing children. Schools kept serving them because the cost was low and the kids kept eating. But when the truth about trans fats finally surfaced, regulators moved fast. Today, partially hydrogenated oils are completely banned from school kitchens, and the fish sticks that remain taste different, lacking the signature crunch of the forbidden fats. Canned meats preserved in nitrate salts looked like pure perfection. The color was bright pink, the flavor smoky, and the shelf life impressive. Housewives of the 1950s trusted them completely, serving slices of corned beef, deviled ham, and luncheon loaf without a second thought. It seemed like progress in a can, modern science keeping dinner safe and pretty. But what scientists would later discover about nitrates changed everything. When heated, these salts created nitrosamines, compounds linked to cancer and heart disease. That beautiful pink hue came at a dangerous cost. Even after the first warnings, it took years for consumers to believe that something so familiar could be deadly. People argued it was overblown, calling it just another scare. But soon, the facts became impossible to ignore. Those rosy slices were proof that sometimes color itself can lie. Doctors began warning families that the same food they fed their children could be silently poisoning them. By the time regulations caught up, generations had already grown up on nitrate-packed meat. It was a harsh lesson. Beauty in food can be deadly if you do not ask what makes it shine. What had once been the color of convenience turned into the warning color of caution. Before there was a health craze about energy drinks, there were sodas laced with brominated vegetable oil, better known as BVO. Found in citrus favorites like Mountain Dew and Sundrop, it was used to keep the flavor evenly mixed. For decades, nobody questioned it. Kids chugged neon green sodas at arcades, parents packed them into lunchboxes, and commercials promised unstoppable energy. It was the soda of summer vacations, backyard barbecues, and glowing green tongues. People had no idea that the same ingredient keeping the citrus oil afloat was slowly building up in their bodies over time. Then scientists revealed that bromine, one of the elements in BVO, could build up in the human body and cause serious health problems. Suddenly, the familiar fizz turned into fear. The Food and Drug Administration banned its use, forcing companies to change their recipes. But for people who grew up in the 80s and 90s, that old taste still lingers in memory. It was sharp, tangy, and just a bit radioactive in color, like drinking liquid lightning from a bottle. It was the flavor of youth, risk, and everything that felt a little too extreme for its own good. Brominated vegetable oil floated invisibly inside the citrus-flavored sodas served at fast food fountains during the 1970s, keeping the fruity flavoring evenly distributed instead of separating. The chemical worked so well that beverage companies used it without hesitation, and customers gulped down orange and lemon-lime drinks by the gallon. Kids ordered refills constantly, never imagining that each sip contained a flame-retardant compound repurposed for the food industry. The drinks tasted bright, refreshing, and perfectly normal. Parents handed them to children at birthday parties and during long summer afternoons spent at plastic tables. But brominated vegetable oil accumulates in fatty tissue, and researchers eventually linked it to thyroid problems and neurological issues. When the evidence mounted, regulators began restricting its use, and major beverage companies quietly reformulated their recipes. Today, most citrus sodas no longer contain the compound, though it took far longer than it should have for the industry to change. Those fizzy orange drinks of the 70s carried a hidden ingredient that nobody thought to question. Full-fat cheese smothering nachos and pizza was one of the great pleasures of 80s school lunches, thick orange layers that stretched and pulled with every bite. Pizza day meant rectangles of dough buried under blankets of melted cheese glistening under heat lamps, while Nacho Day brought mountains of chips covered in warm cheese sauce dripping from every edge. Kids devoured these meals without a thought about fat content or dietary consequences. Cheese was simply delicious, a food group unto itself that made everything taste better. Schools served it generously because children actually ate their lunches when cheese was involved, solving the problem of wasted food and hungry afternoon students. The cheese came from massive blocks or industrial bags, measured by the handful rather than the ounce. But full-fat dairy carried more saturated fat than nutritionists eventually deemed acceptable for growing children. When federal guidelines restricted the types of cheese schools could serve, cafeterias switched to reduced fat versions that melted differently and tasted less rich. Students today eat pizza and nachos that look similar but lack the indulgent quality that made those meals legendary. If any of these toxic foods from your childhood shocked you, share your memories in the comments below. Tap like to spread the truth about what we were really eating, and subscribe so you never miss the next look back at the dangers hiding in plain sight.